Hi guys, and welcome. In my previous video, I said this is what I wanted to do next, and, well, now we're here. For those who don't know, this will be part 1 in my plot breakdown of the 1992 Japanese radio drama GAIA GEAR, based on the novel series of the same name, written from 1988 to 1991 by Yoshiyuki Tomino. Now, this video will be covering events covered in the actual radio drama itself, and will be an overall dissection of the story. This part will cover the first 3 episodes out of 26. For those who haven't seen it, I'll have a link down in the description to my previous video essay explaining GAIA GEAR. This whole video is spoilers, so if you haven't experienced GAIA GEAR or haven't seen my first video in my series, go and check that out. And for now, we're back to the video. Now for a recap, GAIA GEAR was a series of 5 novels written by Yoshiyuki Tomino that were one of his original concepts for a Gundam sequel. The story is set in the year UC-203, over 110 years since Char's Counterattack, 100 years since Gundam Hathaway, and are most definitely the 2 most important pieces of material to experience before going into this story, as the plot contains direct elements and continues many of the loosely hanging plot lines from those 2 pieces of media. To start things off, we begin in the year Universal Century 203, and we are presented with a brief description of what things are like in this new time period. The decades have passed and many wars have been fought between Earth and her colonies. At this point, the space colonies have become extremely overpopulated and polluted. The Federation's Manhunter Agency, or MAHA as they are commonly known as, have been policing the colonies with terrifying brute force and crushing dissent at every turn. In this era, the mobile suits of the past have been somewhat subtly phased out for a new generation of mobile weapons, the man-machines. These machines are highly advanced and extremely powerful compared to the machines from decades prior, but nonetheless are equally as deadly. Compared to the UC-100s, technology has somewhat stagnated, and things for the Earth sphere are somewhat in the dumps right now, with these man-machines being the result of that decline. One thing to take note of is that mobile weapons have garnered quite the negative reputation over the decades. The people of this era have given them the nickname of man-machines due to this fact, as man-machines seem to not refer to their general humanoid shape, but rather the fact that they've been used for such deplorable, inhumane purposes. We begin our story on the Side 2 colony of Hellas, where a train has stopped at a shuttle station to begin unloading its passengers. The place is loud, busy, and crowded. A young woman struggles to put on her magnetic boots as the crowd rushes past her. It is here we are introduced to 3 key characters: an older man by the name of Captain Madra, a young man by the name of Joe, and a young woman named Krishna. The 3 are members of a Spacenoid resistance movement known as Metatron, who are currently at odds with the forces of the Manhunters. As the 3 make it into the terminal, they discuss their current plans to make it to the colony's other pier, where a ship, the Spacius, is docked. But before they can make a move, they are immediately chased and fired on by Federation agents who've detected their arrival. After evading capture, the 3 board the Spacius and set out for Earth, where they've received orders from their higher-ups regarding a mysterious project, the Char Continuation Project. It is then we cut to the colony's capital, where a Federation captain and leader of the Manhunter forces has set up shop within the colony's capital building. This officer is named Bijan Dargle, and he and his lovely assistant, Lieutenant Marissa, are discussing their successful capture of the colony, giving a brief toast to their victory and to their continued successes in the name of the Manhunters. Lieutenant Marissa then brings up the topic of a young officer by the name of Ul Urian, how he too deserves the praise with his success. that with their successful raid, they managed to discover a key Metatron hideout that they were using to develop ships and man-machines of their own to combat the Federation and Maha forces. As the two make plans to make their way down to the site for the investigation, the two are confronted by Hellas's mayor, who demands the Maha forces remove their man-machines from the inside of the colony. Dargle, in response, berates him, seeing as the man allowed such rebellious elements to fester within this colony, and that his level of force was justified when they learned that the Metatron were using the colony as a weapons manufacturing facility. Dargle tells the mayor that he will face harsh punishment for what he's let happen. The mayor, fearing repercussion, tries pleading with him, seeing as the Federation has no understanding for the colonists. He knows they wouldn't even hear his side if he tried to reason with them. Dargle then orders his troops to remove the mayor, the man lashing out as he's dragged from the building. It is then we're given a small glimpse of Dargle's vision for the future, that times need to change and the Earth sphere lacks any sort of current vision for its future. The Earth is beckoning to them, and Dargle wants humanity to answer the call and return home. Shortly after, we're introduced to Ensign Urian, who is driving with another officer as they return to Dargle. On the drive, the two discuss their thoughts on the mission and that the surprise attack on the Metatron factory they conducted was very unsettling to the other man. From what the other officer says, the attack was mostly up against volunteers and unarmed civilians, and that what they did didn't feel like the right approach, alluding to the fact that the Manhunter forces used man-machines to attack the factory forces. However, we're given a brief introduction to just how cold of a man Urian really is. Remembering that the officer accompanying him is from Hellas, Urian asks what the officer would do if he found out his family were members of Metatron. The officer is taken aback by this and says he wouldn't know what he would do. Urian's own response, though, is that if he found out one of his own family members was with Metatron, he would kill them without hesitation. When the officer questions why on earth he would do that, Urian gives us his reasons. You see, Urian is wholeheartedly devoted to the Manhunter cause, and to him the only thing that matters to him is achieving results. So if he was forced to make the choice, he wouldn't hesitate to kill those closest to him for the sake of the mission. As the two meet up with Dargle, the ensign relays some secret intel they managed to uncover from the Metatron hideout. This is in regards to the aforementioned Char continuation project. The two discuss what it means, as the two are both in disbelief on how such a plan, one meant to resurrect a dead man from 100 years ago, would even come to fruition. Nonetheless, the encrypted intel they gained is most likely in regards to the Spacius and its target destination. Dargle then tasks Urian with intercepting this target and hopefully put a stop to the Metatron's plans, whatever they might be for this project. We then cut to several days later, in the middle of the ocean, and to the sound of peaceful waves. A young man stands on the beach, staring at the clouds. Suddenly, a sharp ticking sound can be heard, ringing through the young man's head, and with it, faint echoes of someone else's voice ringing in his ears. The sound only stops when he turns to the sound of a young girl running to him, calling his name. The young man's name is Afranche, and the woman calling to him is named Everly. The two are very close and have lived on this small secluded island all their lives. Afranche, you see, is an orphan, was raised by an aging elder by the name of Gabasu, with Everly being his closest friend growing up. The two are so close, in fact, that Everly and Afranche hope to wed at some point in the near future. We learn from Everly, though, that Gaba disapproves of their marriage plans, seeing as Afranche is seen by everyone in the village as an outsider, not being born on the island. Everly disagrees with this, however, as Afranche has spent his whole life here, and that everyone here is just being stuck up in their old traditions. As the two walk the beach, the two see a passing salvage ship that's been hovering around the island for a few days now. As they talk about the idea of being on the water, the two pass by something truly unique. The wreckage of an old wrecked mobile suit from a century ago that's been beached here, an old Titan's gas plant. It seems that this old suit had washed ashore on the beach many decades ago. Everly herself wonders if the salvage ship might eventually find more under the water and hopes they do something special, like maybe put them into a museum instead of scrapping them like they always do. As Everly heads up the path and asks Afranche to follow, the two are approached by a mysterious person, that being Ensign Urien, who seems to be just casually passing through. He surprises the two and asks about Afranche's name, as he's just overheard it from Everly. The fact he's most interested in particular, is that his last name is somewhat similar to another person's. You see, Afranche's last name is Char. When Urien speaks of the significance of this name, Afranche is somewhat confused, as he's never heard of the name Char Aznable before, but the very mention of the name begins to send very powerful ticks through his head as it's mentioned. We are then given a brief flashback from Urien, shortly after his discussion with Dargle back on Hellas, that the intel they decrypted is in reality a full description of what this project is. The Char Continuation Project aims to create a full genetic replica of Char through the use of a new form of cloning process. The two discuss the impossibility of such a feat, but it seems that the project was a success, with one clone emerging from the project that possesses the full DNA and memories of Char Aznable. Seeing the threat a clone of Char could pose to both the Federation and the Manhunters, Dargle then orders Urien to apprehend this clone so that they can both understand the nature of its creation and its intentions. When Urien meets Afranche, he takes a mental note of his appearance, that the man does indeed somewhat resemble the man from the history books, but something about him doesn't strike Urien as right. He doesn't seem to know who Char Aznable even is. Nonetheless, they have a mission to complete, and they have to apprehend this man before Metatron gets their hands on him. After all, if this man ends up joining Metatron, the worst case scenario would be him eventually leading this movement against them. We then cut back to Everly and Char. The two have managed to make it back home to Gabasu, and Everly vents her frustrations about their new visitors, that with the arrival of these new salvage ships, that things haven't been going right for them. Their radios are distorted, and things outside are getting too hectic for their little island paradise. She also vents her frustrations about what her and Afranche witnessed on the beach, taking note of Urien's strange comments, and that the man came off as extremely rude by butting in and asking so many strange things to Afranche. Gabasu asks where Afranche went, and Everly says he went outside to get some air. Later that evening on the beach, Gabasu finds Afranche sitting alone. He asks what's wrong, and Afranche mentions that the headaches he's been getting have been getting much worse lately. It is here we get a little bit of insight into what Afranche is going through as well. He wonders if Gabasu would understand that lately he's been hearing voices at the back of his head. He even thinks of mentioning it to Everly, back when the two were alone on the beach earlier. It is here that Gabasu has a heartfelt chat with his adoptive son, that he took him in at a very young age, but was never given any information regarding where he came from, as the man himself at that point was getting very old and didn't really give much care to know the reasons why Afranche was orphaned. However, one thing Gaba remembers is that those same people told him to be wary of something in the future, that someday, regardless of how Gabasu felt, Afranche would one day leave the island and go to space. Afranche at first is taken aback by this. The fact he's never even left the island before is a major request. Gabasu then reveals the reasons why he doesn't approve of Afranche's marriage to Everly, that Everly would obviously be opposed to leaving the island in the first place. If Afranche were to wed her, he might never achieve whatever this destiny of his would be, because he would always be tied to her and this place as a result. Afranche then asks if Gaba wants him to go to space. Gaba says that in all truth, Afranche is his own man now, that he should make his own choices himself. Afranche then finally asks if Gaba knows the reasons behind the voices in his head, but all Gaba says in return is that if you knew the answer to that question, what would you do? Afranche says he wouldn't know, but that the pain he feels is far too much and that he feels he must learn the truth behind the voices. Gaba then says there are some things in this world that are too painful to know. that people gain no wisdom by never knowing such things. Afranche then asks if GABA ever wanted to learn the truth. GABA says yes. At one point he probably would have, but now he's gotten old, and the only thing that matters to him now are just the people around him and the home he has built for himself on the island. Afranche then says he loves his home too, but the thought of those voices still persists, that there's something powerful urging him forward. He then declares that he's going to do what GABA was not able to do in his time and learn the truth about all of this, whatever these voices may be about. As the two stand on the beach, the sun's now down and night has set in. The two are called to by Everly, who's running towards them in a panic. She says that men have broken into GABA's house and that they're looking for Afranche. With these attackers not far behind, GABA tells the two to make a break for it and try to get away. As the two run away, they are quickly fired upon by these agents, and they hear a familiar voice berate the officer who fired, shouting not to injure them as killing their target would go against their orders. As the two run and question who these people are, Afranche figures from the shouting voice that the man from earlier, that being Urien, is now after the two. The two try making it to the nearby docks, but before they can make it to safety, they are quickly surrounded, with Urien leading the agents that have now seemed to have caught up with them. When Afranche asks what they'll do to them, Urien says that they're taking them to one of the nearby salvage ships and to not say anything else. But before they can apprehend the two civilians, something emerges from one of the nearby cargo ships that's next to them. This is a man-machine, but not one of the man-machines used by the Manhunters. Rather, this is a man-machine used by Metatron. This is the GAIA GEAR Alpha, and its pilot demands the agents drop their weapons and surrender. The agents quickly back away, with the GAIA GEAR's pilot still threatening to use its weapons on them. As Afranche and Everly breathe a quick sigh of relief, they are approached by a friendly face, this being that of Krishna from earlier. She tells the two to board the cargo ship and that they'll take them away from their pursuers. As they flee onto the cargo ship, and with the Manhunter agents not willing to back down, the GAIA GEAR quickly fires a blast from its beam rifle and sinks the Manhunter salvage ship so that they can't pursue them. As Afranche and Everly are given a brief moment to rest, the ship begins to make its way away from the island. With this unexpected departure, though, Afranche immediately gets an extremely painful tick within his head, the echoes becoming even stronger than they have been before. The voices start to become clearer and louder than they have ever been in the past. These echoes go on for a long while and speak of something that Afranche doesn't know anything about, but we as the listener know all too well. The voice of a man long gone, and the speech he gave to his followers in the final days of his life at a distant colony in space. A speech about the future, and about Zeon. Alright, this marks the end of the first episode. How I'm going to structure these is I'm going to give a tiny review between episodes to sort of get my thought on what's going on. For me, I think this is a solid beginning to this story. Yes, it borrows from a lot of sci-fi cliches, but it's a nice, refreshing thing to see compared to the previous major entry in the story, that being Victory Gundam, at least from a chronological standpoint. As for the characters, the dialogue does a good job at introducing so many faces. At the start, we're given a brief rundown of events that have led us to this point in the UC, but I like that it doesn't seem to care much for stories that have come before, and thus goes off in its own direction and does its own thing. Then again, this story was definitely a showcase of Tomino experimenting with his universe. Dargle and Urien are scumbags, and they'll remain as such throughout this story. Krishna, who I'll get into more later, she starts off a well-written character, but as we're going to go on further into the story, she's not going to make the best decisions for herself, at least towards the very end. As for Afranche, I really like this introduction to his character. He comes off as nothing like his predecessor in Char Aznable, but rather very caring and understanding of others instead, and I really believe this works in his favor, setting up a Char clone who's only a clone of Char in the sense of his DNA. Anyways, let's get on with episode 2. We pick back up on the cargo ship as it leaves the shore. Joe has just landed the GAIA GEAR Alpha within the ship's cargo hold, and the wind seems to be picking up on the boat. Everly and Afranche fearfully stand at the edge of the ship's rear, with both of them still being scared of their current situation. They are soon met by the captain of the cargo ship, that being Captain Madra, who introduces himself to the couple. When Everly demands him to turn the ship around and return to the island, Madra states that if they were to do that, they'd most likely be found by the Manhunters and killed. Soon after, the couple are met by Krishna, who's calling to the captain. The captain then quickly introduces her to the couple as well. Yet Krishna's response is one that takes Afranche aback for a second. The girl addresses Afranche as Your Excellency, and that it's a great honor to have him aboard their ship. The captain tries to dial back Krishna's excitement and says that it's a little too early to be addressing the man like that. Krishna admits that she's a bit too overly excited, which the captain admits that he too is excited about this. He then calls Afranche Your Excellency as well, and proceeds to graciously welcome him on board their ship. Before Afranche can make any sort of comment on the situation, the captain is called to the bridge by Joe. He says that they'd better get below decks, as they're going to be increasing speed now that they left the coast. He tells Krishna to help their guests, and leaves. Before the three head down into the ship, however, Afranche asks the question that's obviously been aching the couple. What exactly is going on here? Who are you people? And why were those agents trying to catch them? Krishna, though, seems confused by this thought, bewildered by the fact that the man before her has never heard of the likes of Metatron. We quickly cut to the bridge. Joe and the captain worry that their escape wasn't exactly quiet, and that Minovsky particles are beginning to increase in the area. When Joe offers to put the GAIA GEAR on standby, the captain asks him not to, as it would raise too much attention from any nearby Manhunter forces in the area. Soon after, Krishna comes onto the bridge and tells the captain and the others of what she just witnessed with Afranche. The crew seems bewildered by this, of the idea that the man they've been ordered to retrieve knows nothing about Metatron, or what's going on for that matter, as they believed they were told that what they were supposed to retrieve was a copy of Char Aznable. As the group argue if they even got the right person, they do all manage to reconfirm that the man they've got with them is identified as Afranche Char, knowing as the Manhunter forces were after him. Krishna still makes note of Afranche, though, that he does in fact look like the man she's seen in the historical recordings 100 times, and that the young man seems to carry himself with a similar stride. When Joe pokes fun at Krishna's fangirling, Krishna reassures them all that Afranche is the man they've been sent for, and that hopefully this man can become the savior that Metatron is looking for as well. The captain, however, remains a bit skeptical, that if he doesn't turn out to be the one they've been looking for, they're going to be in a lot of trouble for pulling off this stunt against the Manhunters. Down below in the lower cabin, Afranche and Everly try to make sense of their situation. The two find this whole ship is strange, and the people on board it are even stranger. Everly even makes note of the captain, who she's managed to figure out is not a sailor and isn't from around here. Afranche noticed this too. The people on board have sunburns on them, but not the ones that someone would get if they spent their whole lives on the ocean. Growing scared of the reasons for taking them off the island, and wondering why they won't just take them back, Everly begins to panic. But just as Afranche tries to calm her down, he begins to have another splitting headache. Afranche begins to hear the sound from before in his head. Before Everly can comfort him, this ticking sound suddenly stops. Afranche then leaps from his seat and tells Everly to stay here while he goes upstairs onto the deck. Before Everly can ask him why, he leaves the room. On the main deck, Afranche is blasted by a gust of wind. The waves are getting rougher, it seems. As Afranche tries to make sense of the sounds in his head, he hears the noise of tools operating in the cargo hold. Looking down inside, he sees Joe and the other technicians working on the GAIA GEAR. Down below, Joe and the others talk about what it feels like to be down on Earth. That this is even the first time Joe has been down here, and so far, Mother Nature is a lot more unpleasant than Joe first believed. It doesn't help that this rickety container ship is also housing a man-machine that's turning this room into a boiler room. When one of the technicians named Kellen is asked what he thinks, the young man admits that it is unpleasant, but this is still Earth, and it's where humanity originated from. But now that they're here, the feeling of returning has lost much of its romanticism. It just doesn't feel like they really belong here, and that they really just miss space. The two make a joke about Kellen missing his girlfriend, and the group goes about their business. Before they can, Afranche is seen standing at the far entrance to the cargo hold, awestruck by the machine that is the GAIA gear. Joe introduces himself and the other crew members to His Excellency and offers to allow Afranche a ride in it, or even a chance at piloting this new fancy model. Before Afranche can give an answer, though, Everly makes her way into the hold, and the two begin to admire the fancy machine that's being serviced. Afranche being excited by the GAIA gear's sleek fighter mode, and Everly disgusted that a horrifying weapon is being stored on this ship. As she drags Afranche away, the three crew members are left to comment on their new guests. Everly, in particular, is not a person Joe finds attractive, dragging Afranche from place to place while Afranche can't get a break. As the couple return to their cabin, Afranche decides to go see the captain, that maybe he can reason with him and let them off the ship so that they can head back home. On the bridge, the captain greets Afranche, stating he'd really hoped to meet the great Char Aznable in a better situation. That with the Manhunters on their tail, things are starting to get more hectic. When Afranche asks about the Manhunters, the captain is confused. They're only the most powerful military force in the Federation, and the men who are trying to apprehend him at this very moment. But just as Afranche demands that the captain return them home, they hear a loud noise coming from outside. It seems the Manhunters have found them. They're demanding that they hand Char over, with them now having a helicopter circled above the cargo ship. As the noise persists, Afranche is hit with another sharp splitting tick. The captain orders the couple into his quarters as the helicopter begins to open fire on the deck. He then orders one of the other crew members to get into the GAIA gear so that they can hopefully defend the ship. The hatches open, and GAIA gear fires a shot from its beam rifle, destroying the helicopter. Back in the captain's quarters, Afranche manages to find the captain's emergency handgun and tells Everly to stay behind him so that Afranche can get some answers from him. When the captain tries to go back into the room, Afranche comes out and draws the pistol, holding the man at gunpoint. When the captain asks what the meaning of all this is, Afranche says he's done playing games, and that everyone needs to stop calling him His Excellency. When the captain asks if he'll really shoot him, Afranche nervously says that he's never killed anyone before, but he's not afraid to do it. He's confused and tired of people chasing and dragging him around, yet not giving him clear answers on the things he wants to know. The captain says he'll explain everything, just as long as Afranche lowers the gun. Now, taking a step back, we then cut over to Ensign Urian, who's now on board a small submarine. He's now just learned that the chopper he sent to stop the cargo ship has been destroyed. He knows that even though they lost the chopper, they now have the cargo ship's location, and they need to act now if they're going to be able to catch it. As they try to figure out how they're going to do it, knowing that the ship has a man-machine stationed on board it, they quickly receive a communique from the Manhunter base at Hong Kong that they've offered to send one of their own man-machines to intercept the ship within the hour. When one of Urian's subordinates gets excited about the idea of a man-machine on man-machine battle, Urian admits that he too is looking forward to it, but they need to be stealthy so that the enemy can't get their own man-machine into the air. If they do, then things might get out of control as a result. Urian reaffirms that he's not going to let this Char clone get away this time. Back in the captain's quarters, the captain gives Afranche a big history lesson on the colonies. That Char Aznable, the man that Afranche is a clone of, was once the leader of the Spacenoid independence movement, and after 100 years, with Manhunter now emerging to become the tyrannical force that they are, Metatron has emerged to oppose them, believing that they too possess the ideals that Char Aznable once proclaimed. Yet during this time, The Spacenoid independence movement lacks a voice and proper leadership in this chaotic period, being that Metatron definitely has the spirit, but lacks the proper forces needed to stand up against the Federation. Their leadership has what it takes, but not the people that follow them. And if Metatron could show the people that Char Aznable himself has been reborn to fight back, people might finally band together to change this current status quo. Afranche, in response, thinks of this as quite overwhelming, even Everly as well. That the world is asking way too much from a man who's never heard of the name Char since last night. Nonetheless, Afranche possesses the blood of Caspal Ramdaikun, that only until he goes into space that Afranche's destiny will truly be revealed to him, and that Char Aznable, the part of him that is within Afranche, will finally be awakened as well. Now, keep in mind, Afranche doesn't know this yet. He doesn't even know that he's a clone yet, and he's spent his whole life so far on that island. Afranche wonders what will awaken within him exactly if he goes, and the captain says he's not quite sure, but that the way the captain was told about it almost sounded like something he's heard before, something that all of us have heard before. The idea of a new type. When Afranche asks what a new type is, the captain gives us the same explanation that we as Gundam fans have been told for years, that someday mankind will evolve once they abandon the Earth, that some unknown power will manifest within them to allow them to better adapt to their new existence amongst the stars. But now, in these trying times, the idea has largely vanished into myth, that if there are new types still out there probably aren't many of them left. However, from what the captain knows, Char Aznable was known to be one of these new types, and that maybe, just maybe, Afranche has that same power. When Afranche wonders if it's even a possibility, the captain tells him, why not go and find out? But before they can come to a decision, Everly intervenes and says she and Afranche aren't doing what they're asking, and that they are going home. The captain, however, sternly looks at Everly and tells them that they should really go and see what kind of world they've been living in all this time. That the small island they've been living on all their lives is nothing more than an artificial paradise sitting in the middle of an empty ocean. He then offers them a place amongst their ship, that Afranche would make a great crew member while they're traveling through space, and he even offers to teach him how to use the GAIA gear. Everly herself is highly against this, though. She doesn't want Afranche to go off and pilot a weapon that's designed to kill people. The captain then backs down, seeing that after all, this should be his decision at the end. For the time being, he'd like it if Afranche helped them out, and maybe afterwards he can get them a ride home. Afranche thanks the captain and apologizes for pointing the gun at him, the captain smirking at the fact he noticed the pistol wasn't even loaded. Later, the captain is asked by one of the crew why he'd consider letting them return to the island, as without Afranche to help them, they'd most likely get crushed by the manhunters in pursuit of them. The captain admits that they do need his help, though, but the man doesn't exactly want to help them. So for now, he's just going to have to roll with it. For now, they have to at least get Afranche to Hong Kong. He laments that maybe they've been too hard on him and had been asking too much of him. We then return to the hangar with Joe and the other technicians. They point out that of all the strange things, Afranche had a look on his face like he'd never seen a man-machine before. That the way he was looking at it, it seemed GAIA Gear Alpha was the very first man-machine he'd ever laid eyes on. They even question if he's really supposed to be their leader. One of them says that piloting man-machines in the end shouldn't matter, but if Afranche is a clone of who he's been claimed to be, why doesn't he seem more like the legendary ace pilot, the Red Comet? The three then reminisce about their childhoods and the countless stories they grew up to be obsessed about when it came to the famous Zeon Ace. It is here that Krishna reappears with their rations, and when she asks them what they're talking about, the group politely asks her to stay out of it. Guy stuff. Back on the top deck, Afranche is staring up at the stars. He's still fixated on the thought that a long time ago, so many people had the idea to go up and make colonies for themselves amongst the cosmos, that up until this point, he'd never really thought about how impressive of a feat that was. That all this time on his little island paradise, there was an even larger world out here. When Everly herself finally asks if Afranche wants to go there, Afranche quickly responds that no, that's not what he meant, but since he himself is still young, he doesn't mind the possibility of exploring the world while he still has the time. Afranche then mentions the same thing that Gabasu told him on the beach, that those who left him in his care wanted Afranche to go to space in the future. And now that all these recent developments have occurred, he's starting to realize what it all means. That since he has no family in his life outside of Gaba, that if maybe he did go up into space under the name of Char, he might be able to come to a better understanding about his own self as a result. Everly, in response, doesn't take these words well. She thinks he's going to leave her for a bunch of strangers and storms off, seeing as Afranche does still have someone who cares about him, that being her, as well as those he spent his whole life with on the island. That all of those things should be enough, and that whatever his connection to Char is, it's really just something not worth exploring. She tells him to just go, and storms off before Afranche can say anything more. As Afranche is left alone, it is here that he's once again met by Krishna, who seemed to hear the argument and hopes maybe she can offer some help. But Afranche isn't in a good mood. He tells her not to call him His Excellency like the others, and just to call him by his proper name. He laments he said some mean stuff, and he wasn't really being very supportive to his fiancée. Krishna sees that he does seem to have a bad side, and Afranche says that sometimes it does take more than just love to love someone. Krishna agrees, seeing as she lost her own father a while ago, and in comparison to Afranche, her father was the kind of man whose only merit was kindness and nothing else. She then mentions the mother that left her as a child to go off and live with some rich guy. Afranche laments that maybe he should go to space in the end, but Krishna reaffirms him and tells him the best place for him to be in this moment is to be wherever Everly is. With that sentiment, Afranche agrees with her, but before anything more can be said, the two see a blinding light flying through the darkness. A blinding light that's heading straight for them. Krishna can see it approaching from just above the waterline. A man-machine. It blasts across the deck, kicking up waves as it rockets past. With floodlights activated, it lands its feet on the deck of the cargo ship. This man-machine is the one sent by the Manhunter forces from Hong Kong, and its pilot proclaims the cargo ship is now under its control, and if anyone resists, they will be shot. As the man-machine repeats its message, the two witness the surveillance submarine emerge from beside them. It seems their pursuers have caught up with them. And with that, Episode 2 ends. Now that Episode 2's over with, I can talk about what I think about when it comes to this approach to a Gundam story. We've seen in Gundam stories in the past that protagonists of Gundam stories are usually portrayed to be the lead pilot in the very first episode, something that was enforced by Victory Gundam, with its weird fourth episode being released as its first. But GAIA GEAR really likes to take its time, still showing off the titular mecha, doing some cool stuff, but waiting for the best moment for the main character to get behind the wheel, letting the story build up a little more before we get into the more badass stuff. And with GAIA GEAR's first 3 episodes being structured the way they are, we get a real nice steady growth for our protagonist and the heroes that'll follow him throughout his journey. Afranche himself is really cool, as he shows that yes, he's a clone of Char, but only in the broadest terms. And with the next episode coming up, you'll get to see the greatest display of his character potential, in my opinion. Now, without further ado, let us get into the next episode and one of my personal favorite episodes from the entire story of GAIA GEAR. Episode 3. On board the cargo ship, we're shown that the Federation soldiers have managed to round everyone up, with Ensign Urien noticing that they've only managed to round up around 16 people, and that there must be more people hiding below decks. He even grants the use of lethal force to anyone who resists them. Back in the small crowd of prisoners, Afranche sees Urien and immediately recognizes him from before on the night of their escape. He's soon interrupted by Krishna, who mentions that there's something wrong. Everly isn't here. Afranche says she should be in the cabin and asks Krishna if there's any places she'd be able to hide. Krishna says that the only place would be under the bed, and they'd easily be able to find her if they did. The two are told to remain quiet, as Urien asks the leader of the group to step forward. Madra then steps forward, and Urien smirks at the thought they couldn't have possibly made a clean getaway with sinking their salvage ship, and that they're gonna regret messing with the Manhunters. Madra tries to appease Urien by saying that they were simply too naive and hoping for the best outcome. Ensign Urien then introduces himself to the captain as the leader of the forces that have been pursuing them all this time, ever since the raid on Hellas, and that his own personal division of the Maha Space Forces have been specially created for this mission of capturing them. When Madra is asked if he knew of any intelligence regarding them as pursuers, the captain says no, and he says they've been too busy to look into it. Urien then orders Afranche to be brought forward. After being shoved towards the front, Urien slyly says hello and asks if Afranche missed him. Afranche points out that Urien himself doesn't exactly look like a soldier, being so formally dressed. Urien points to Afranche in return, seeing him as well as playing the part of a civilian. When Afranche demands to know how Urien got his hands on his home's information, Urien backhands him in the face and tells Afranche not to get smart with him, and stating that Afranche should know better, since he himself doesn't know who Char Aznable is, that Afranche should just drop the act. When Afranche says he had no choice but to go with Metatron since Urien's forces were chasing him, Urien hits him again, saying like that should be an excuse for getting involved. But before he can say more, he notices that there's one key person missing from the prisoners. Afranche tries lying and tells Urien that Everly jumped ship just after they left the island. Urien doesn't seem to fall for it, however, stating that Everly must have been a pretty selfish woman to abandon him alone. He then strikes Afranche again, telling him that he should really keep in mind what kind of situation he's involved in, and that he should really keep in mind who's in charge right now. Urien then orders his men to detain all of the prisoners below decks, while Urien himself questions them above, starting with Krishna. In the interrogation room, Urien plays things really casually, offering Krishna a coffee before he begins, even though it was originally theirs to begin with. Krishna is quiet, though, throughout all of this, and Urien takes note of the nervous faces she's giving while trying to avoid eye contact, saying there's nothing to be afraid of, and that Urien in this moment is simply acting out of kindness for her as she seems distressed. This puts Krishna at ease, as she believed they were going to be doing things far worse to her. Urien laughs at this and says that Metatron doesn't seem to have its thoughts straight, that whatever she's been told is wrong, and he simply just wants some answers. When Krishna points out the scene on the deck with Afranche, Urien assures her that it was only meant to scare them, and that just injuring one of them should be enough to get some answers from the rest. Everly says what Urien did was rather devious, and the things he said about Everly were not right, picking a piece from Afranche's lie from earlier and telling him that Everly didn't want to leave, but Afranche insisted that she go home. Urien takes note of this and points out that it's quite odd that such a sweet girl like her is working for a group of the likes of Metatron. It is here Krishna gives us her reasons for joining, knowing it's probably the only way she can make any sort of living for herself. However, though, in all reality, she does believe she can change the system by working with them. That through Metatron, they can change the status quo and bring the colonies out of poverty. Urian then asks where she lived while on Hellas and briefly comes to an understanding when he learns she grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood as a kid. The man chuckles as he's now realized this whole interrogation isn't really getting them anywhere, and that he really shouldn't be fraternizing with the enemy. He ends their interrogation and orders her to return to the prisoners. Krishna says that it was nice meeting him, as he doesn't seem as scary to her as she thought. The man doesn't seem to be good or evil, just being exactly what he needs to be in the moment. Now, pause. Pause this thing right now, okay? Side note, and I really have to state this right now, this next moment really illustrates how much of a creep Urian is. This guy is freaking disgusting. Urian accepts her compliments and says that if she weren't working with Metatron, he might have had the gumption to ask her out on a date, and that maybe with this conversation, she may see things that way as well. When Krishna is creeped out by this sly advance, Urian gets angered and orders one of his other soldiers to take her away to be properly interrogated, stating that the Manhunters do not believe that people should stay quiet and that they will do what needs to be done to get answers from them, even if it means more unseemly methods. Down in the bowels of the ship, Afranche and the others try to figure out what they should do now. Afranche, of course, is mostly worried about Everly, but the captain reassures him that she should still be okay, since he thinks they probably haven't found her yet. Afranche fears that they might take them on board the submarine, but if they do so, hopefully will leave Everly behind and thus she'll be okay. The captain, on the other hand, makes note of the man-machine on the upper decks. Its insignias are that of the Manhunter forces at Hong Kong. With that, he judges that this is most likely where they're going to be heading, and that if that were the case, that Hong Kong wouldn't be a bad place to be taken to, as this was where they were heading anyways, as the city has a vast array of launch shuttles that they could use to escape the planet. If they could escape, they might be able to link up with their Metatron allies on the mainland, and they might be able to hitch a ride back into space as a result. Seeing the opportunity placed before him, Afranche asks if they'll consider taking him with them. The captain, however, becomes worried by this idea, as if Afranche were to go into space, that would no doubt lead to him being placed as the new leader of Metatron, a responsibility he now knows that the young man is not ready for. Afranche says that becoming a leader isn't something he's capable of doing, but if he possesses the blood of Char, he thinks that with it he might be able to still help Metatron in his own way. The captain is grateful for the sentiment and hopes that they can all figure out how they can escape now. All the while, Afranche's thoughts are drifting to Everly, still hoping that she's safe, and that even though the world is drawing him down this new path, the thought of her is always in his mind. This abruptly ends, though, when Afranche experiences another tick within his head, causing him to fall to the floor in another bout of splitting pain. As the captain and the others panic, asking the guard to help as he's obviously hurt, Afranche's ticking persists this time. Distinctly, someone's voice can be heard within the constant ringing in his ears. Before he can figure out anything else and decipher anymore, the ringing stops, leaving Afranche to ponder what exactly he just experienced and whose voice he actually heard. On the top deck of the ship, the Manhunter man-machine patrols the deck above. As it scans the horizon for signs of danger, its hatch then opens and the pilot inside hops out to greet Urian. The man's name is Lieutenant Wong Lo, and asks for Urian's forgiveness for exiting his machine while they're in the middle of a mission. Urian forgives the man and asks to give the major at the Manhunter base at Hong Kong his regards after all of this. The lieutenant says he'll sing his praises to the major and that he'll most likely be heading back towards the mainland very soon. Urian says it's all fine with him as another soldier quickly arrives with the captain and Afranche in his custody. When Urian asks why he's brought them, the captain berates Urian for hurting Afranche earlier, as now because of it, something very wrong has begun to occur in the young man's body. When Urian offers a medic, Afranche says he's fine and that the captain is really just overreacting. Urian then wonders if Afranche is willing to answer some of his questions, such as why was he on the island and why he's been living in secret all this time. When Afranche tells him the truth, that he wasn't hiding and that he's just been living there this whole time because it's his home, Urian quickly points out how strange that Afranche has been living on the Earth this whole time, and if he was indeed the leader of Metatron, then why is he all the way down here? When the captain says none of this is his fault and that he was never told the truth about any of this, Urian is confused as he finds it odd that Afranche was never told about his connection to the great Char Aznable before, but nonetheless doesn't seem to be falling for the act, thinking Metatron in the end panicked and decided to grab Afranche as a last-ditch effort. When the captain says that Urian should be more respectful, since Afranche regardless still possesses the blood of Char, that perhaps someday he will claim his destiny as Metatron's rightful leader, and that he was most likely brought down here so that he can learn about Earth. In return, Urian laughs at this idea, that Metatron is probably lying to them, and that would probably be pointless since Afranche is a memory clone of a famous leader, and he wouldn't need to. When Afranche hears of this and asks why, Urian explains the basics of the concept, but then mocks Afranche, stating that because he is a memory clone, he may not in fact be human, and the people who created him simply planned on using him as a puppet and a storage device for Char's memories. After Afranche hears this, he's suddenly barraged with another sprain of tics. This time, however, since the voices are becoming clearer to him, he hears the voices from before call out. But also, he hears a new voice shouting Char's name into the void, with Char's own voice crying out to save her. Before Afranche can figure out anything else, though, his attention is brought back to reality, where it seems Urian's men have managed to find Everly. She's dragged onto the deck, with Urian mockingly confirming his suspicions that he's being lied to, and jokingly says that Everly must really love him to come all the way back onto the boat. He adds a slight sting afterwards when he says that he finds it very odd that a puppet could find someone like Everly and fall in love with them. Afranche, however, isn't taking all of this well, as his head is still spinning, and the fact he's now learning he's a clone isn't really helping things, saying it's all not true, and causing him to scream. And then, he kicks Urian in the face, grabs his gun, firing it at one of the other agents, and starts making a break for it. Now, here's where things get interesting. When Afranche runs away and dives into the ship's cargo hold, whose hatch was left open when the Manhunters secured the ship, he continues hearing the voices call to him. As he looks above and sees the Gussa still standing around and guarding the ship's top deck, Afranche then notices the GAIA gear is still sitting in the hold and makes a dash for the cockpit. The Manhunter's not firing since they're unable to see due to the fact it's still dark out, and the man machine is unable to fire because it could sink the whole ship if it did. Now, this moment in particular is my personal favorite moment in this entire story. Afranche climbs into the GAIA gear. He's never piloted this thing before, so he starts fiddling with the controls and manages to hit the switch on accident. As the GAIA gear starts to move, he fears that he could get shot, but luckily manages to shut the cockpit. As the lights inside the cockpit turn on, he notices that the entire suit has a full panoramic monitor. As his eyes begin to look at the controls, he begins to have a very scary realization for himself that he's somehow familiar with this exact kind of machine and how it works, yet has never seen or used it before. His hands easily and properly manning the controls with ease. All throughout this, he's terrified of the fact he knows all of this and how he knows all of this, as yet again, he's never seen or touched one of these things before ever in his life. Up on the deck, Urien orders the GUSA to destroy the other man-machine, and as the GUSA orders Afranche to surrender, Afranche activates something in the GAIA gear, causing it to raise its arm, raising the machine's beam rifle forward. This, however, is not aimed at the GUSA, but rather the ship itself. As the GUSA warns him of the damage that would likely cause, and that the shot would likely kill him at that range, Afranche screams as the beam rifle reaches full charge. The GAIA gear then turns around and snapshots the GUSA in the cockpit, causing it to explode and fall into the ocean off the side of the ship's bow. This act leaves everyone on the deck in total shock, all of them frozen with the fact Afranche was able to perform such an astonishing feat with no training. Afranche then speaks out over the GAIA gear's intercom and orders the remaining Manhunter forces to surrender, and if they resist, they'll be thrown into the ocean. The captain then tells Urien to do as the man asks, as Afranche doesn't seem to be thinking straight, and he could do something worse if they do not listen to him. All the while, Urien's belief that Afranche is Char Aznable reborn is all but solidified. Back inside the GAIA gear, Afranche has a moment of clarity. He realizes that what most likely has happened is that somehow, some inherent muscle memory has kicked in on instinct, and whatever part of his brain that possesses the memories of Char must have managed to kick in whenever he was in danger and saw the GAIA gear. Afranche wonders exactly what all of this means, and the scene ends. We then pick up a short while later, and the crew of the ship have managed to free themselves, capturing the Manhunters and in return sending them back onto one of the lifeboats without their weapons. Urien wonders why he's sparing them, and Afranche explains that the people of his home island are not involved in all of this, and Urien and his cronies surviving will be proof of that. Urien says that maybe he should just lie about what happened and have the Manhunters target the island anyway. Afranche says he doesn't believe him, and he knows he'll still tell the truth anyway. When Urien thinks Afranche is mocking him, Afranche says he's sorry, and he has them give over their communication equipment so that when they send them adrift, they can't call for reinforcements to attack them. He's gracious and lets them have some supplies so that hopefully they will be picked up by a passing ship while it's still adrift. But if no one comes to get them and they all starve, that they can all blame it all on Afranche in the end. Urien admits he won't blame him, just blaming himself for his bad luck. He's then kicked onto the lifeboat and tells Afranche he'll regret sparing his life for this. Afranche says that he'll remember that, and the two part ways, leaving Urien stranded with his men on the middle of the water in the middle of the night, with Krishna shouting to Urien over the side of the ship that he's nothing more than a creep as they leave. Urien just shrugs it off, and his men start rowing away. Back on the bridge, one of the other technicians asks if it was a good idea to let them live. The captain says he's fine with it, as these were Afranche's orders and he'll just have to live with it. On the deck, Afranche sits by himself before Everly comes to greet him. Afranche isn't in the mood and politely asks her not to talk to him, the whole ordeal still playing through his head. Everly says okay, and that he should meet her back in the cabin so that they can at least give him some food. Afranche says he'll come up later, and the episode ends with him watching the sunrise, all the while questioning the voices that he's been hearing throughout the night, who they were, what their words meant, and what exactly they're leading him to, if he is a clone of Char, or something else entirely. Alright, and that marks the end of episode 3, one of my personal favorite episodes from the GAIA GEAR radio drama. This one is a beast, and I definitely believe it's one of the great highlights. Not only for the story, but for the man-machines and characters themselves. We really get a sense that the perspectives of everyone is very skewed towards the idea of Afranche being a copy of Char, praising and almost worshipping the guy, when in reality he's really just a kid who's been thrust into a strange situation. As for Everly, Afranche also seems to be getting wrapped up in all this praise, so she's a good person for Afranche to have around as to bring his thoughts back down to Earth level. As for Urian, oh my god, this guy is such a creep. And just so you know, beforehand, he's going to get even more creepier as the story progresses. This scene, the scene with Krishna, is one that really makes me feel sick when I hear the guy's voice. Now, turning things over and getting into my favorite part, the artwork produced by New Type magazine that is used to illustrate key moments in the story really does a good job of showing off what exactly is going on. The dialogue itself doesn't show this because, well, the whole story is nothing but dialogue and audio, but the GAIA GEAR Alpha we see at the start is actually an incomplete version, at least compared to the one we will see later. The Gussa as well is an interesting suit too. Its design is very reminiscent of a high-end sports car, with its grill-shaped torso being all rectangular, and lending to the idea that the suit is a high-end mass-production model used by the Manhunters and is nothing more than an enemy grunt. Now, in regards to the GAIA GEAR, the later version we see depicted in the later artwork is an awesome piece of visual storytelling in my opinion. The suit and its fighter mode really remind me of the Victory 2, and most strikingly, the Zeta Gundam. Now, personally, I think the connection that is supposed to be made is a really awesome one, that Afranche, who is once again a clone of Char, now living in the UC-200s, is piloting a mecha that looks a lot like the Zeta Gundam, the very suit that Char's protege Camille helped design and the perfecter of transforming mobile suit technology. Later on, we'll get to see the GAIA GEAR use funnels, and this story gets even more awesome. Just think, little Afranche, who is the last of Char's bloodline, is now piloting a suit whose influence is inspired by Camille. Just perfect. As for Afranche himself, the scene where he learns he's capable of piloting a man-machine is freaking awesome. Just the idea of him having a panic attack at the sheer fact he's able to control this thing without knowledge of it at all is really, really fun. The guy goes from, wait, how do I know how to pilot this thing? To, wait, I know how to pilot this thing. Oh my god, how do I know how to pilot this thing? Please help me, I'm scared, I shouldn't know how to pilot this thing. Now, jokes aside, I think these first 3 episodes really paint a good picture for this story. That Afranche is destined to be their big leader, yet knows nothing about what's going on, and the people around him are getting sucked up around him into this idea that he's clearly not what they asked for. Now, later on, he's going to develop into a much more courageous leader, but once again, the people around him are really asking too much from him. The guy literally just left his home the other night for the first time in his life, and now you're asking him to lead a revolution. All right, that is it for this video. Tune in next time where I go into episodes 4 and 6. I think this is going to be how I'm going to structure it, at least at the start. Um, nice 3-episode chunks seems to be a good approach with this sort of breakdown format, as the radio drama itself, each episode's like 20 minutes, like 15, 20 minutes. They don't exactly have a lot of action, at least at the beginning, and writing these breakdowns takes a lot of time, so for now we'll leave it at that. Go ahead and listen to the audio drama for yourself if you can find it. It's a little tricky to find, but I promise it's worth looking for, especially trying to find that subtitled version. Also, for those who are still watching, I would love to hear what you guys think about this, because I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, and I'm very passionate about GAIA gear, and I would love to hear what everyone else thinks of it. Have you guys heard of GAIA gear? Have you not? Go check it out. It's a nice piece of forgotten Gundam history, and it deserves all of the community's love and attention these days. See you guys later. This is GAIA Gaius, signing out. Bye!